I'm here to introduce you to Crystal, who is a recent transplant to Northeast Iowa from sunny Southern California, although I know Southern California is not always sunny. But she has been the director at Postville since 2022, and shortly after that added on being the project coordinator for our Postville Community Heart and Soul. Too energetic for me, but she's doing a great job with it. She believes public libraries should identify all the groups that reside in their communities and assess their unique needs to make sure libraries are truly serving their population. So let's hear what she has to say. Thanks,
Thank you.
Crystal.
Thanks so much for having me. So the first thing I was going to ask everyone who was watching today was to turn their cameras on. And then I found out we're in conference mode, so that is not a thing. So this is going to be amazing. I just love to see my audience, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get my slideshow up. We're good? Can we see it? Okay. I see a nod. I have one.
That looks great.
Thanks, Brenda. All right. So I am the new director at Postville Public Library, started July of 2022. And then 3 months later, became the project coordinator for our Postville Community Heart and Soul and the grant funded community developer for the city of Postville. And I will explain what Community Heart and Soul is, of course, in a second. So just a little bit about me. I am, you stole my first slide. I am a recent transplant from Southern California. I was a public school teacher for 15 years in Rancho Cucamonga. I taught choir. And I applied for the library job because I live right outside town. And I thought that if I got a job at the public library, I would be able to sneak in some financial literacy classes. The funny thing is I haven't started those yet. It's still on the list. But so I was thinking about applying for this job at the library to do community development. I was also worried that no one else would apply. It had been a few months since the previous director had sort of announced, hey, I'd like to retire, and there weren't any fish biting. So I was concerned for my local library. And then I'm an avid reader and I love books, and I might possibly be a book hoarder. So it seemed like a really great match. So brand new career for me. 3 months later, I decided to apply for yet another new career. I was thinking that this project coordinator and community developer position would overlap with a lot of the things I really wanted to do in the library. And it has. And then, I thought, let's start a whole new career with no experience. So these are just some pictures from work we've done in our community development, and lucky in town, right down the alley from our library, I can walk and go get Somali Shah, which is tea. It's very much like chai. So not something I was expecting moving to rural Northeast Iowa. So a little bit about Postville. Talking to people in Iowa, usually people have heard of Postville, but not always. So to say that we are a diverse community is an understatement. We're about 60% Latino right now. Predominantly those people are coming from Guatemala and Nicaragua. Sort of our earlier wave was more from Mexico, but we also have people from Venezuela, Argentina, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, all kinds of places. About 10 to 20% of our community is Orthodox Jewish, predominantly from New York, but lots of people from Israel. And then we have about 10% of town is Somali. And then we have a whole variety of other fun things like folks from Palau and the Philippines. And most of those folks have come here because we have a very large kosher slaughterhouse and they come to work. So a very diverse community with a lot of different needs. And another thing in town that is just a reality is that the town is still dealing with quite a bit of trauma from the 2008 ice raid of the agri-processors meatpacking facility, and have folks that work at the library who had loved ones who were hiding in country houses for weeks. Had folks who worked at the school was locked down. There's helicopters. They don't know what's going on. Had families ripped in half overnight. Almost half the town disappeared overnight. Over almost 400 people were deported in these mass deportation trials in Waterloo. So a lot of you are from the area. You probably know this. But setting up that town has not been the same since, understandably. So A lot of our infrastructure was impacted by that. Our economy was impacted by that. So that is a reality for us. So the city and some volunteers in the city wanted to try and do something to change the narrative around the town. Because when you hear about Postville, usually it's not always great things. There was also a book. I was told at my last presentation, actually in Iowa, we know about the book. So there was also a book about town, but that took place about 8 years before the raid. So they really wanted to change the narrative and embrace our diversity and share what we have and try and have folks think nice things about town. And so that was one of the reasons they started this Community Heart and Soul project. That project started in the fall of 2021, and the previous project coordinator moved on to a different job. So I took over in the fall of 22. I have a lot of pictures here to cue me about things to talk about. So on the left bottom corner, you can see a poster. This was one of our posters to try and get folks to take our survey, and we'll talk about surveys in a second, and that's in Hebrew. So a lot of our Jewish population does not read English. They read Hebrew or Yiddish and speak Hebrew or Yiddish. And then just upper right-hand corner, one of our activities we did on our front door. Some of you folks might have some libraries that were built in the 70s and are a little drab as well. So I wanted to get some bright colors on the outside on our front door to tell, show folks that, hey, kids can come in here and, this is a fun place to be, not just a beige place. There's a picture outside of one of our summer reading activities with some of our kiddos. And then there's a poster in Spanish. We have a new Spanish book section that we sort of expanded. And I have that there not to share that, hey, we bought books in Spanish. That's not particularly groundbreaking, but we bought them. And then I went out into the community to find the folks who would be reading them to share that they are here. We do a lot of social media stuff, but that's not going to reach everyone. So I have this whole track I do in town where I walk around, and depending on who I'm trying to reach at that moment, I go to certain stores, or I go to a certain synagogue, or I go by the Islamic Center, or so to try and make sure our community knows the resources we have. And then the bottom right hand corner is a sign that we have when you walk into the library. I just wanted folks when they first walk in to feel like we were acknowledging them and that we wanted them to be at the library. So you're running a whole library, or you work at a library, and you're thinking, gosh, don't we do enough, Crystal? Why would we want to do community development as well? So you're going to take what works for you, right? From my presentation. Not everything is going to be for every person. I guess I would say, why not? Because there is so much flexibility in programming and services. Coming from the position before where it was like I was to teach choir and that was what I did, and there really wasn't as much flexibility. This position feels so much more free to me. So I guess I would say, why not? Since if you can, but to look at the needs of your community, they may be very different than mine. They probably are. And to think about how that would inform your programming, or is it in fact programming? Community development can be programming. And is anyone else in town doing it? I don't know how many folks here are from very small rural communities, but certain things are not always getting done in those communities. And so who is going to do it? So that would be what I would suggest thinking about when you're thinking about this. Some examples, lower left-hand corner, we did an event at the public school where we wanted to try and get people to take our survey, which is not easy to do, but also do an activity where we knew everyone could participate even if they were not speaking English yet, because we have a lot of newcomers. So you'll see there's like a little tree that's a heart, because heart and soul, community heart and soul, and everybody put their fingerprints on it. And we have this filled out tree, and we have it at the library with everyone's fingerprints. And we thought it would be nice to show like we're all the same, right? Like we all have fingerprints. We're all part of this family tree here. We did an event prior to the raid. Postville used to have this great event called Taste of Postville, where it was like all the different foods and dancing and activities, and people from outside the community would come. And that's really something that the town has been missing since the year before the raid. So we did a little riff on it, where we had sort of a progressive event where you could go around to all these businesses, and we made a map. We gave out coupons at our farmers market and really just encourage folks to get into the stores that they may not be going in. We have a lot of folks who've been in town. I like to call them the generational Postvillians. They've been here for 100, 200 years, their families, and they sort of think a lot about the old days and how things used to be, and with some missing those things, but then don't try the new things that are here and don't go to some of these places. And so I thought, well, if we give you some coupons, maybe you'll get in there. And once you've been in and see that, La Canasta is a Mexican grocery store, but it's got things that you would want too, then maybe we'll get people to go back. So supporting our local businesses, doing some economic development as well. The next table with my volunteer from our Heart and Soul team, we got some we have a Mexican bakery in town, and then we made some Somali Shah, and we got some treats from the Guatemalan market. And we sort of teased folks and had them try those things, and then gave them those coupon books to try and get them out into the community. Up in the upper right-hand corner, that is our Mexican bakery, Mi Dulce Elena. Mi Dulce Elena the business is so smart that she now knows what food she can sell to our Somali residents that'll be halal. So they couldn't have gelatin if it has pork products in it. And she also has some fruit cups and things that are kosher. So just that sort of like cross-cultural, like how many places can you go in Iowa where there's a Mexican bakery making halal desserts, one, maybe a couple. And then we also have been working on some community outreach. I made we had some blankets donated by the Linus Project, or Project Linus. I always mix it up. And they reached out to me. And so we were giving out blankets through the library. We also put these signs up at our local food pantry because folks are already going there, and let them know they could come get blankets. And we also did a winter clothing drive for November through December, I think. We had almost 300 folks show up between about July and September, primarily from Guatemala. And I would see folks in the morning walking to work wearing blankets instead of jackets and things. So we got a bunch of local donations, and we were giving out clothes at the library for a couple months. So just some ideas of things. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Community Heart and Soul. I do not work for Community Heart and Soul. I am engaged in the Community Heart and Soul process right now with my community, and I am the project coordinator for that. But don't work for them or anything. Mostly, I'm encouraging you today to steal things from them and not necessarily do the process. It's a very involved process. It's a lot of work. I think it's worth it, and I believe in it. But I'm not here to try and convince you as a library staff or director that you should also take on this giant project. But there are things to be learned from it that we can steal, and they have their blessing to teach you how to steal things from them. So they're directly from their website. It's a resident-driven process that engages the entire population of a town in identifying what they love most about their community, what future they want for it, and how to achieve it. There are a lot of surveys, like a lot, and people don't want to take them, especially men. Sorry, men. So you will have to. Part of the process is figuring out how are we going to reach all of these people. So it isn't always as simple as creating a survey. It isn't as simple as putting it on social media or having it in the library, which does help. We literally came up with a plan for each community in our town as to how to reach them. And while doing the survey, kept track of our demographics to make sure that we had reached everyone. So early on, we had a huge surplus of white women over the age of 55 answering our survey, which was great. After day one, we did not have to worry about that group. We did have to seek out men. We did have to balance with our Latino population since we're over half of town. Our high school principal was super cool, and he actually emailed out our link for the survey. And that email alone balanced us out because the school is about 70% Latino, if not more. So keeping track of those things, we kept track of poor versus middle class versus rich. We kept track of household, like if they lived in the rural areas, if they were a farmer, if they were in the city. We kept track of age. We kept track of all of these things to make sure we heard from everyone. Because if you do a survey, sometimes you're going to get answers from all the same people and not from different groups. And one of the big emphases of Heart and Soul is that everyone has a voice and everyone counts, and you want to hear from them. So this process was developed and field tested over a decade in partnership with over 100 small cities and towns across America. And I think there's at least 20 to 30 towns doing it right now, including Postville. Several cities in Iowa are doing it, and some have finished. We're not quite done. And actually, I needed to update this because this is a presentation I made a few months ago. We are entering phase 4. So phase 1 over here, this little graphic, you make your heart and soul team with people from the community. Our team was formed before I came on. Our city clerk was on it. One of our city council members is on it. Our retired school librarian is on it. Our county community developer is on it, economic tourism person. A local economic tourism person with one of our electric co-ops is on it. All kinds of different people are on it. And you form these teams. And then you figure out your branding and start sharing about this, exciting process is happening and get people involved. And phase 2 is where we do that big old survey and get all that data. And phase 3, you sort of share back that data with your population and get them to vet it and make sure they like it. And right now we are coming up with a plan where we are taking all that data, we've had it vetted, and we are figuring out what we're going to do and who's going to do it, when it's going to get done, and who's going to be the person to make sure it all gets done. So one of the cool outcomes of this process is that we've actually got the city to commit to hiring not a full-time, it's a part-time position, but hiring a community developer, which is one of the things we really felt like we needed. And doing this process has proven that enough that our city council unanimously voted to add that position at the city. So that person will probably be the person who makes sure all the things get done. So a little bit about heart and soul. And I am planning on leaving question time at the end. So I see there's a couple comments in the chat, but the way my brain works, if I start reading them, I'll see a butterfly and we won't get back. So here are some strategies that you could maybe steal from Heart and Soul if your town's not interested in engaging in this super intense process. So what are the demographics in your town? And I put, no, really, what are they? The 2020 census may or may not be an accurate representation of your community. I don't think it's accurate about ours. So not only is it from 4 years ago, but we had a huge influx of folks over the past few months. And the census is only accurate as to who's answered it. And I know that we have lots of folks in town that did not. So keeping that in mind, digging deeper, looking at your school demographics, right? According to the 2020 census, I think our town's like 40% Latino, but our school is like 70 to 80%. So, don't be afraid to do some research. And I also we have quite a few Jewish schools in town, and I had some friends at those schools and asked, what's your student population at that school? Because there isn't a demographic that tracks Jewish folks. So trying to figure, but that's relevant because they have unique aspects to how they engage in our culture and our community. So and the next thing I put is surveys. That is something you can steal from Heart and Soul. But then I crossed it out and put building relationships and trust, because no one's going to take your survey if they don't trust you. We made sure to emphasize our surveys were anonymous. We made sure to take those surveys to places where people had already established that they trusted folks. So we took them to our food pantry, where we have a lot of our population go, and they have built relationships and rapport with folks there. We contacted some of the churches and did it through churches. Obviously, being at the library and sort of being the face of this program, I have people coming in that I've built relationships with. But and then figuring out what people really want, and they may not know. They might think they know, or they may not tell you, or it's not always as easy as it seems like when you put out a survey. So being really careful about the questions you're asking. It can be hard to be open-ended, but not too open, but you don't want to lead folks somewhere. So be patient. It takes work to get folks to tell you what they want, which is amazing, right? You're trying to offer them like a way to let's fix town. And they're like, I don't know if I want to talk to you. So starting this process only a couple months after starting at the library has helped me learn things about my library patrons and about the library that maybe I would have learned, but it would have taken a lot longer, or I would probably not have ever learned. So getting so in depth and learning all these things and looking at all this data, and you get this data and you reorganize it many times and do a lot of different things with it. And I really, really know pretty clearly now what people in town want. And so that can lead my programming at the library. So another thing to steal down here, I know it looks a little complicated. It's called the impact feasibility matrix. You can definitely simplify it. I made simpler versions of it. But what I think it's really cool for doing is helping folks think. Everybody thinks their ideas are great and everybody thinks their ideas are the most important. So this sort of makes you sort of think about, well, what impact will this idea have? And is it feasible? So we've had all kinds of ideas from folks in town. One of the things that came up a lot on surveys is that folks in town want a Walmart, and I cannot give them one, nor can the city. There's no space for one. They're not building one in a pop town of 2,500 people when there's one 20 minutes away. So that's not a feasible idea. So we can sort of, yes, think, but maybe that idea leads us somewhere. What is it that that person's getting at? Business, local business, right? We can still take things from those ideas. We had another thing that came up over and over from basically the same person and no one else, but they brought it up a lot. They wished we had a sign at the entrance to the community for John R. Mott, who was the founder of our town. And that's pretty feasible, but what is the impact? How does that benefit our town? How does that help people living in our town? And so we couldn't really figure out exactly what that would do when we kept asking about that. So just an example of how some ideas you can kind of see that it's like, So when you're organizing all this data, you can take those ideas that have both a high impact and high feasibility and prioritize those. So you could do the same thing at your library. I don't know about you guys, but I have a list of like a whole page of programming ideas and things I would love to do someday. And maybe some of those are feasible this year and maybe some of them aren't. And it can be hard to pick what you want to do. So thinking about what can I make happen? What's an easy win, right? I can do a couple easy wins, especially if you're new at a library or new in a position. I can do some easy wins and have people be like, oh, yeah. And then also what's going to have a really big impact. So they don't always line up perfectly, right? Sometimes things that have a huge impact have really low feasibility or they're really difficult to achieve. But that's a cool tool that you could totally steal from Heart and Soul. Don't let this one confuse you. So this one's really cool because a lot of comments you also hear frequently from maybe more mature people is that, oh, things were great 20 years ago. Or really, though, what they're like talking about sometimes is like 40 years ago. But forcing people to think about where you start with this one, how are things today? So this one I put in local business. With local business in our community, that was one of the things that came up a lot. And how do we feel like things are today? And our team sort of thought it was at about a 7. Okay, that's not terrible. It was worse. It's been worse and it's been better. And how do you think things were 20 years ago? They were a 9. Okay, so things were better. So what were they doing 20 years ago that we're not doing anymore? Or what has happened since that has impacted, in our case, the rate has been a huge impact on business, but other things may be happening too. Maybe 20 years ago, the city had a community developer, which it did. Maybe 20 years ago, we were advertising more for our local businesses. So thinking about that helps you sort of pull out those ideas of why are things worse now? I will tell you that almost unanimously, if you speak to someone over 50, they will tell you that things were always better 20 years ago. So that's not always the case, but that is the answer you're going to get a lot. So, and then another important part of this is if we do nothing differently, where are things headed? Do we think if we do nothing from here on out, our local business is going to get better? And we did not think that was the case. And then how would we like things to be? We decided a 9.5. So just something to help sort of, again, make people think about ideas. And then over on the right-hand side, we had some ideas about what were things that would help our local business. Signage. We have a lot of folks who've come from other places, and there aren't always signs, nor do you even know it's a business sometimes. We have some crumbling facades and things. We have people that don't even have a Google listing yet. So things like that. So another tool you can sort of change, just forcing folks to think about, okay, if things were better, why were they better? What was happening? What is it that we can control and change? So I wanted to share that after you take all these surveys, you take all that data and you make these statements, heart and soul statements. And these heart and soul statements are designed to lead your community development or lead things that your maybe action your city council would take. Our city council officially adopted these statements. So they can guide city plans, but they could also then guide your plans at the library and help you with your programming. So for example, just from a library perspective, if you look at our first two community events and diversity, we got a lot of feedback about we want more community events, and we specifically want events where we get to meet our neighbors, where we get to see this diversity and learn about it and share food. And all of that can be done at the library, right? In different ways. I also think libraries can help with local business by teaming up, right? You could have the local coffee shop host your coffee on your stay and play or whatever. So education, absolutely. One of our biggest answers for that was folks want English as a second language classes in town, in person. The library absolutely can be engaged in that process. So, and being welcoming. I mean, really, almost all of these statements directly can tie into the library. So they also could potentially impact your thinking about the accessibility of your library. And I don't just mean like for those who might be in a wheelchair or something like that, thinking about the age of folks. Once you know your demographics, the age of folks that are coming in, is our library accessible for them? We had a lot of books on our bottom shelf that folks might be able to get down, but they aren't coming back up. So we've gotten rid of books on the bottom shelf. Accessibility for folks that don't speak or read English. We've got instructions in 4 languages next to our wireless printer at the front, so that if folks don't speak English, hopefully they can read one of those languages or we can figure it out. Book selection, obviously, this is like duh, but over half of our town reads or speaks Spanish as a native language, and our library is not half Spanish books. Nor do I necessarily think it will be, but working on that. And staffing. In the last year, we hired 3 bilingual staff members. One has since moved, but we now have 2 staff members that speak Spanish fluently, and I struggle through Spanish, but we can get the job done. So these statements that you generate from the heart and soul process can be really helpful for library programming and decisions. So a couple of things before I take questions and comments. This right here on the right hand side was like the first time Postville has been in any kind of like a tourism booklet in a very long time. So I was very proud of that. Came up with come get a taste of Postville, because really that's what we have to offer that folks, other communities out here don't have. We have 2 Mexican restaurants, we have 2 Somali markets, we have a Mexican grocery store, we have 2 Guatemalan grocery stores now, we have a kosher market, we have a Mexican bakery. I mean, just all these cool things that you're not going to find in the next town over. So I thought, let's play on that. And then this is one of our Somali markets, where we took a group of folks, mostly they were from Decorah, nearby, very different demographics, lots of Scandinavians. And we took them on a tour of Postville, walked around town, and we got tacos, and we went to all the ethnic markets, and we had Shah, Somali tea. We took them to the kosher market, and someone found they'd been looking for beef bacon and they didn't realize they could buy it here. So taking folks around and showing them what we have to offer. So yeah, it was a really, really fun event, and that is all I have. So should I stop my screen share or leave it up?
That's entirely up to you. There have been a couple of questions so far, although I told people I would gather them, so it could be they're waiting. Ferry wanted to know, how do you find the translators that you need for all the languages, both for your informational materials and for when people visit the library?
So the translators, it can be really, really challenging. So Spanish was reasonably easy. There are quite a few folks in town. Because of doing the heart and soul process and doing all of this surveying and talking with folks, I met quite a few people working in town who are bilingual. And I can read and write in Spanish. I don't speak it super well, but so we have quite a few people that help us with Spanish translations. And also I have to say that Google Translate does a pretty dang good job with Spanish. It doesn't do a good job with everything. It's not perfect. But one of the things I do if I'm so I will use Google Translate, but then I will read it myself with that particular language. If you do it back and forth, so it's like you put in the English, you get the Spanish, and then push the arrow and switch them. That is kind of your like litmus test as far as to, does this make any sense? And you'll see a lot of times things get weird. So putting it back and then sort of rephrasing things, simplifying things, stripping things down, being less passive, like voice, to just more like direct. So Spanish wasn't too hard. We had someone come in early on who actually, I made copies of her Hebrew to English translator certification. And I sort of stored that in my brain. And I was like, hey, so I got her to translate our copy machine instructions really early on. And then I already
Right.
had her in my back pocket. But again, getting to know that community, I'm actually like completely unpracticing, but I am Jewish. So being able to reach out to the community has been helpful, but I don't read Hebrew. So, and then the Somali has been really challenging. That community came down after the raid because all the workforce was, a lot of them are leaving. So it can be really hard to find, the older generations do not read or speak English, but the younger generations aren't reading Somali or speaking Somali necessarily. So it can be really hard to find someone who can do both. I have found that Google Translate is not the way to go with Somali. It's really weird. I will use it for a sentence or two. I will use it on a poster if it's like, we've got books. And I will flip it back and forth, and I always have to rephrase things. Somali just has totally different grammar and sentence structure than English. So but for those heart and soul statements, that fancy page with all of our like welcoming and diversity, like that was important to me that it needed to be accurate because it's hanging in City Hall. So I like went on an investigation spree to try and find a Somali translator because the one I had moved out of town. They moved back to Minneapolis, which keeps happening. So I just kept doing some digging. I had a patron who came in and I helped him edit his resume. And I thought maybe he could do it. And he's like, oh, I don't read Somali, but here's my friend. So she literally came in the next day. And he's in Minneapolis, but he sent her to me. And what we've done also Russian and Ukrainian. We have some Ukrainian refugees. We also have a bunch of folks from the former USSR who actually came over in the 80s. A lot of them, of course, are like reading and speaking English by now, but we do have quite a few newer Ukrainians. We have a couple people in the community that speak Ukrainian and Russian. And then we have a woman who actually did our translations in a local community in Lansing. She owns a framing shop, I think, but she also cooks Ukrainian food on the weekends. So we paid her, and we paid all of our translators out of our heart and soul budget. They had applied for some grants and things to pay for those services. I think that's really important because I think it's not always great to put the burden back on someone. It's like, I'm trying to reach out this community, and then I'm going to put the burden of this translation on someone in that community. A lot of folks are happy to do that for free, but I think that when you're doing it for an official document and you're asking for a certain level, that you should be willing to pay for it. And that should maybe be part of your budget if you're going to care about it. But we paid them like $20 a page. So, I mean, it's not super expensive.
Okay, and then someone wanted to know about people asking for services and then not necessarily following through. For instance, in their example, they had people asking, hey, get puzzles in the library, and now that they have them, no one is using them. I'm sure you're encountering something similar to that in places.
So I bought, I think before Heart and Soul even started, I bought a bunch of books in Spanish. And then like no one came to check them out. And I did advertise it on social media, like literally no one uses Instagram here. I still do it anyway because you can do both on the Meta manager, but mostly it's Facebook out here. So I advertised it, but like still no one came in. But then once I really started doing that digging into who's in our community and where are they getting their information, who's getting their information where, that has really been impactful. So like the Spanish books get checked out more now because I am posting posters in Spanish at the food pantry. I am going into the Mexican market, the Guatemalan markets, and I ask them, and I know the business owners, I always have some flyer or something, but it's usually me trying to give things. Can I hang this up on your door? So when folks, because that's where they all go. They're all going to those markets. So a lot of our newer people are going to the food pantry. So they're going to see that and then they're going to know, oh, okay, I can go check out books. Whenever people come into the library, I try and plug it. Like if I hear someone walk in and they speak Spanish, I let them know we have books in Spanish now. So you have to keep doing it, and you have to do it regularly and over again. It doesn't always happen immediately. I do think sometimes people say, like, I've had so many people suggest program ideas to me, and then I'm like, they wouldn't even come. Like, I know that person. They're suggesting some program. I know they're not going to come. So doing a little bit more digging first before you spend the money and go out and do the things and buy the things. I think my other mistake with that first batch of Spanish books, I was like, I'm going to buy books that were written in Spanish from Central Americans and South Americans, not Spain Spanish, right? Like I want them to have, they want Colleen Hoover. in Spanish. So, like talking to them, I put out little papers in our Spanish bookshelf in Spanish that say, what books would you like us to buy? So getting to know your community. I made a lot of assumptions when I first started. I assumed our Jewish community, because they were more well established, wouldn't want books. And that wasn't true. And I only found that out because during summer reading, I was like, oh, hey, will you take our survey? And they shared with me, we want the library to have books. It's like, okay. So
Okay. That's good. I was going to actually ask you about what kind of Spanish materials you were getting, whether you were getting
it's a
translations
mixed
from that.
bag.
So
We have some
thank you.
fine literature, and we have lots of Colleen Hoover, and we have Isabella. I see her name from here, Isabel
Allende.
Allende. Yeah,
Yeah.
Allende. I can't see the double L, but yeah. So that's been very popular.
Okay. Okay. Someone noticed Council Connection on your library's website, and they were
You guys are
wondering what that
stalking
was.
us already. So one of our city council members has been very engaged. Well, we have a city council member on our Heart and Soul team, and then one who's been pretty involved lately in that process. And she came up with the idea of, what if we had a way for folks to come speak to the city council members, not at city council meetings, which are super intimidating, and especially if their language skills are not there.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that council connection on Thursdays with a translator for Spanish, because I happen to have an employee at that same time who speaks Spanish. So we planned that on purpose. It's like, okay, what day could we have you come in where we already have that person there? And so she comes in, and we've only had that a few weeks for the most part. It's just been a older gentleman named Bob. I'm sure every one of you guys has a Bob in your community, and Bob has a lot of ideas and a lot of complaints. But our city council member is very gracious. And sometimes you actually get stuff out of that too, because I don't go to all of them, but I go to some of them and I take notes about things. We've been picking a different theme every week that's connected to our heart and soul statements. So sometimes you get some interesting comments out of that. But we're going to keep going for a few months to try and see. I told her, I was like, this is a great idea. We don't know if anyone's going to show up. Adjust your expectations. But we wanted to have it out there, at least for folks who may feel uncomfortable at city council meetings or not have the language skills to do that. And then she can speak Hebrew. So, yeah.
I like that. Well, there's an apology for stalking your website already. We are librarians, and yes.
Don't look at the website itself. I haven't updated it
yet. We're information professionals. Did anyone else have questions? I think it's mostly been commentary. Similar experiences with surveying results, etc.
I put my email in the chat. I'll put it again because I realized it was nowhere in my presentation. Again, we've all figured out. I was like, I know you can find me, but this email is better. That's my community developer email, because no offense, but the @mail. And then we have a Google too for the library, but I'm better at this other email.
Got it. Thank you.
Trying to see if there's anything I can see.
There are some people that plan to visit next time they're in the area. It is a beautiful area. It is.
If it's a Wednesday or a Thursday, I can maybe even take a walk with folks and show them around. Yeah. So I guess the with surveys, it's really like the fidelity of your survey, and it isn't as simple as making it and sharing it. It really, I think for our process, we sort of decided, and you can, everyone does heart and soul, this process differently. We took 3 months to do that survey.
Wow.
And we met as a team to specifically, we came up with very specific questions that we thought through. We gave a different survey to our people that were under the age of 19. So because we have different questions for them, so that group, we asked, what would we need to do for you to stay in town? Because most folks leave. Sure. So just being really careful, but obviously that wasn't a library survey. That was just a community survey. We asked, what do you love about Postville? What would make Postville better? But that doesn't get you all the data you need. We then followed up and went out into the community, shared the data back, and asked for more, and said, okay, you've said you care about this. So what do we need to do for that to be a reality? We've said we care about diversity. What does that mean?
Right.
Because everybody says it. Everyone said we love the diversity. Okay, what are we doing to steward that and take care of it? And what does it mean that we love it? So it takes a lot of, you have to keep digging and keep asking. Focus groups and things like that, and just sort of conversations. I would go to when I went to Shabbat dinner at one of the hundreds of rabbis in town. Not a joke, like most dudes in town are a rabbi. When I went to Shabbat dinner, I'm having a very lovely evening, wine, a conversation, and literally when I left that night, I went and took notes as I sat in my car about the conversation, about the things they said they wanted to see in town, and so yeah.
It does take a lot of work because you do have to dig that information out of people frequently. So this has been great. Did anyone else have questions?
Oh, good. I was afraid I was going to go over.
No, this is perfect. So just before I forget about it, let me once again put the link in for CE. Again, please wait until it's the last session you do today and go and do that. So you only have to do it once.
And I get to too, right?
Yes, absolutely. There may be a place on there to say, hey, I was a presenter too, although I'm pretty sure we're aware.
You might need to refresh me on all of that too, by the way, because I am pretty new and I've been a little distracted.
Yes, you have been distracted. Yeah, that's fine. You can call your district consultant anytime. And yes, if you're not sure, I'm her district consultant. So, and then go back to the main page to pick your next session when you're ready. Sorry.
Right. I will just say if you're ever in Northeast Iowa, by kind of between Decorah, north of Waterloo, and come check out Postville. It takes a little digging sometimes. It might, when you drive through, you might not be on the street where all the fun things are. I've been the director here since July 2022. And before that, I was not a librarian.
Right. And yes, I mean, because the drive-through is all on the highway, so that always misses all the good
and
stuff.
That's some feedback we've gotten too. We need some signs. We need wayfinding signs that direct people to the street with the fun things.
Sure.
And
sure.
So
those are an ongoing project everywhere. So if we're not going to have more questions,